everyone. Welcome to our next connection point with Vanessa Richmond, who's joining us just coming off of Web Summit. I know that you were there, Vanessa. I was there too. And we're going to get to talk a little bit about what you were expecting out of it, what you found during it, and maybe some things that were missing from it. Vanessa and her team work at Vigilantes, and their work is really focused on helping organizations get really clear on what their identity is and then how they're supposed to fit that into the marketplace that they serve. I think that's a fair representation.
Great.
Yeah. Okay, great. So we'll get right into it. When you think about Web Summit, huge conference for Vancouver, happened a couple of weeks ago.
Totally.
When you think about kind of the expectations that built around that conference, what were you hoping and what was the expectation that you went into with it?
I mean, huge conference for Vancouver, one of the biggest we've ever had. The Atlantic bills Web Summit as where the future goes to be born. It doesn't get bigger hype than that. And I went in really interested in a lot of the juicy topics that were in the program. For me, it was things like the next era of social media, or what's the fate of human work in the age of intelligent machines, or this other one, is this the end of media in 2025? So I'm like, wow, okay. And for me, the in-person format is actually really special. Like, I read all the time. I love podcasts, but there's something about the live environment, people getting up on stage, sharing their expertise, and also it takes a lot of courage to get up there. So I feel like it's a heightened experience and I just learn more from it than in other places. So I was really excited going in.
Yeah, I was as well. And I think you're right. So some of those titles, it was just like, this is incredible.
Yeah.
Are we actually going to talk about that? That is
Yeah.
so cool.
Hit me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, I'm going to bring notepad, pencil.
Yeah.
I'm going to be writing. I'm going to be recording. This is going to
Yeah.
be incredible.
Yeah.
When you were there, what were some of
Yeah.
the things that you were like, okay, this is what I actually experienced or took away from that?
On that first morning, I think it was Wednesday morning, I went to the very first session, which I think was a lazy ad agency 10 a.m. And when I went in, I actually felt like I was in an electronic music festival. The music was going and there were big monitors. There was like a light show. I was almost like, we got to get up to the front, you guys. Like, we got to get a spot. And every seat in the house was taken. It was standing room only. There were thousands of people in that room with hundreds of people standing. And I was like, wow, it's on. And what I noticed at lunch is I was still like waiting for it to start. In a way, I didn't feel like I got much from the morning. And at the end of the day, a few people were like, that was light to a large extent. And I noticed that by the next morning, I was there at 10 a.m. in my seat and the room was only a third full.
Yeah.
And what I will say is the parties at night were really busy. And I met a lot of people.
Yeah.
So in that sense, the conference was a real success. But I think if I look at the content, the main thing I noticed was how light the questions were. But then the other thing, like I noticed, I was in one session about AI and the moderator was like, is there a problem with security in AI? And the expert was like, security is the biggest problem and my company has solved it with a proprietary technology. And I was like, okay, wait a minute.
Yeah. Pitch. Yeah.
Wait a minute. And as a friend put it to me that night, oh, it's SpawnCon. It's pay to play. And I think for me, the idea of sponsored content is fine. I work in advertising. I get it. And I actually think sometimes like the ads on TV are even more interesting than the programming. Ads can be fascinating cultural content. Pitches can be electric, somebody conveying their idea. But I think for me, what I was surprised about is there was no framing so that I could tell which was which. I think that felt difficult to navigate.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. And when I think what you were saying just about some of the questions versus what they could have been, some of
Yes.
these folks, as much as they were pitching their product to an
Yeah.
extent, you had experts on that stage.
Oh,
These were people that
yes.
could have talked about incredibly deep technical things, non-technical parts about how to really use tech and AI and where is it headed?
Yes.
Where is it now? What's realistic with it? You had the
Yeah.
right people.
Yes.
Which I think was the missed opportunity. You had these incredibly intelligent speakers who could
Frontline.
talk wild detail
Yeah,
about
they
what is
could.
actually happening. And
Yes.
it was the questions. I think you were right. Hit it on the head. Like the questions were so soft lobs,
Yeah.
which I think was just such a real miss in terms of the caliber of people that were on that stage and what they could
Mhm.
have talked about. Yeah. Big
I wished for
opportunity there.
a little sidebar with them or a drink with them and be like, okay, what do you really think is going on in AI? And to be like,
Yeah.
okay, let me tell you what's going on. That's what I was wishing for and yearning for.
I think that could have been a really cool evening thing is,
Yeah.
hey, these speakers are going to be at this event. These speakers are going to be at this event. If you want to go and hang out
Get
with
the
them
real
later, this
story.
is where they are.
Yeah.
It's like, then you could have broken it up. I think those evening pieces, there were only so many things going on each
Yeah.
evening.
Yeah.
And so it was like sell out or you wouldn't get there fast enough.
Yeah.
And so I think there could have been more of that organic play. And I find any conference, this one including, most of the kind of real value comes out of what is happening outside of the actual conference. And
Yeah.
so more of that would have been great. But we've
Really
got it here
good.
for another 2 years. So maybe
Yeah.
next
Maybe
year.
next year. That would be what I would suggest.
Yeah.
I think if I could speak to the conference organizers, I think what I would say is trust and engagement are so tightly linked. And in fact, most other channels other than conferences have found a way to let us know when it's organic versus paid content. Even Google lets us know when it's sponsored content. They're not exactly running a charity. And they find it helps them to engage people even more when people know the difference. And I don't think it takes away from the content when we know it's paid. I actually think it puts a different burden on that expert to present things in a super compelling way, given that it is paid.
Mhm.
So I don't think attendance would drop. I actually think it would just mean we knew what to do with it. And conferences, obviously, people stopped going entirely during COVID. And in 2022, it came back 84%. There was a huge growth. And since then, the growth has been slow. But I think people are really craving in person experiences. And if conference organizers want us to keep coming, I think that would be a way to keep our trust and keep providing that content in a way that people really want.
Yeah. I think going into it with kind of an eyes wide open, you know what to expect and
Yeah.
how to get more out of it.
Yes.
Yeah. Apart from that piece around that trust aspect,
Yeah.
are there parts around coming out of the conference? Was there something you think this should have been a much bigger part of this conversation?
Mm.
Or this was something that maybe was touched on a little bit, but it wasn't given the kind of gravity that it should have?
I'm going to be a broken record with this trust in content thing. I think
Yeah.
Neil Patel did such a great session. And one of the things he talked about was this idea about synthetic content. So the fact that when content is produced entirely by AI with no human intervention, it engages us less. So content prepared by a human, he said, creates 5.1 times the rate of click-throughs to something else. And I think it's worth just really talking about how, yes, AI is fantastic. Yes, paid content is fantastic. And if we really want engagement, we also need to think about what is that authentic human layer that's
Mhm.
in there that actually drives people to want to be part of it.
And I think that was such a cool presentation and the statistics around it because it was if AI produces it on its own versus if a human uses AI to produce it, but they're doing still most of the legwork
Mm,
versus a straight up human does it, AI is
yeah,
not involved at all. It was
yeah,
completely different numbers each of those 3 times. And it's just fascinating. Like, obviously, humans can tell, even if it was involved in creating that content, which is just such a cool
yeah.
thing that subconsciously we still know whether or not a bot was involved. And it just really tells us from that marketing lens, people don't want to talk to an AI. They don't want to hear from an AI. They want to hear from
No,
another human and they can tell the difference, even though it's
yeah.
new. And I think what I would expect to see happen is that AI will become more organic in the way that it produces
Mm,
content. It will get harder to tell the
mhm,
difference. But I think
mhm.
we're always going to see a multiplier on just human to human content versus other kind of content that gets created. So really fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much for joining us today, Vanessa. And I
Thanks
know
for
that you
having me.
also, yeah, I also know you wrote an article on LinkedIn just about your takeaways from the conference. So I'll make sure that we link to that as well.
Thanks.